Oh, we're live. Episode something of this thing that we do where we talk to people that are interesting and provide really valuable insights into the business of whatever it is that they do. Let me start off today with a little bit different tact. Let's start off with a poem. I think that's a great way to go. And I'll start by saying this: 'Tis true my form is something odd, but blaming me is blaming God. Could I create myself anew, I would not fail in pleasing you. If I could reach from pole to pole, or grasp the ocean with a span, I would be measured by the soul. The mind is the standard of the man. And when we're talking about minds, I have one heck of a mind with us today. Jason Miller is an associate professor at Michigan State University, Eli Broad College of Business. You will see Jason all over platforms like LinkedIn, bringing information that is breaking news and just generally interesting about the state of our supply chains. I am so excited to have him join us, and he'll be here in just 1 minute. As we have our conversation, if you have questions for either myself, oh, I'm buffering. Okay, we're still going. We're still alive. Now, before we get to Jason, a couple pieces of interesting news. One piece of news that's been pretty interesting in the overall scheme of things is that Amazon is buying iRobot, the manufacturer of the Roomba. If you're like me, you've been wondering for some time, when can I have more robots from Amazon monitoring my activities? Well, wait no further. For $1.7 billion, billion with a B, Amazon will soon be cleaning up your house, just like you always wanted. EVs are coming, and they're coming fast. And one of the things we've learned about EVs is that they're easier to maintain. Some of the studies that are out now say that up to 22% less cost in maintenance. I'll tell you this right now, that cost will continue to go down. The specialized technicians to work on EVs, as this becomes more a part of our normal infrastructure, will allow the cost to even be further decreased. There are less, potentially hundreds, if not thousands of parts in an EV versus an internal combustion engine. This is really fascinating. And finally, for everyone who loves streaming services, one of the things I find fascinating is that HBO Max has been purchased by Discovery. And for everyone who's watching this now, I know you've been wondering, how can I get my Discovery Plus things that I like to stream also on my HBO Max? Well, don't worry. Discovery will take care of that for you. I will say, final thing before Jason joins us, I really liked Raised by Wolves. It's a great program, great sci-fi on HBO Max, and it was canceled after 2 seasons. It is heartbreaking, and I hope somebody revives or renews Raised by Wolves. Without further ado, Jason Miller, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Matt.
I am such a big fan of what you've been doing over the last few years. Tell us, first of all, what do you do? What's your role at Michigan State University, Eli Broad College of Business?
Yeah, so for folks that really don't know, most of you here, professor, you think teaching. Pretty much all of us here at a place like Michigan State, we're primarily researchers. What do we research? I'm going to just put it plainly, academic-y stuff that we usually don't put out for general public consumption because that's not what it's written for. It's written in a very technical, specific language. I always joke that if you're going to read one of my papers, you need to brush up on your Greek because there's a lot of Greek symbols that go into that. So I spend most of my time on academic research and then a decent chunk on teaching. A lot of that teaching, it's not really the time in the classroom that takes up the time, it's the prep work. Usually, rule of thumb, 2 to 3 hours of prep per hour you're in the classroom. So all of a sudden you're teaching 9 credit hours, of content, that adds up quickly. Then we do a lot of service, outreach, engagement, advising doctoral students, reviewing journal articles, also known as free labor. Still don't know how that system got set up. We would love to go back and change that. And then, getting to do fun, I'd say the really fun stuff, like come on shows like this.
Well, I have a lot of friends who who follow you as well. And they sometimes ask me, like, what is the best way to read a Professor Jason Miller post? And I'm going to give my tip, and you can tell me if this is off the mark. What I typically do is I start with your implication. I scroll down and say, okay, what is it that he's concluding from this information? And then I go back to the top and I read it and say, does this information kind of coincide with the implication you've given? Because I love about your language, like you're not saying conclusion, you're not saying this is what it shows, you're saying this is what it implies, this is what we see. Are there any tips you'd give to people who aren't used to reading such really interesting and dense material, how to better understand posts that you put together?
Yeah, what I would say is usually I try to structure it with the logic, thinking about if I was presenting something in a lecture doing executive education, what would I do? I would put a graph up almost always and say, okay, here's what these data are. Now, and that's going to be the opening part. Here's where I pulled it from. Then how do we, what are some key features of this? What are some things you should look for in this plot? And then lastly is essentially the generalization from it. So we've say, essentially I always say what I've bullet pointed is just descriptive. That is literally me telling you things that are in the plot that you may not be able to see because you don't, what percentage change is that humans aren't very good at eyeballing that. But then the implications is trying to do sort of the generalization from it. So what can you take away with it? So it would really depend on what you're trying to get out of, content like that. For me, I've got a very good idea what point 1, point 2 are. And then as I go through and start writing it out, that's when a lot of the implications and the juices get flowing to think about, okay, what are the inferences you can generalize from this?
I love that method because what you do, which I find just amazingly useful, is you have your citations to the data. Where is it coming from? Who's the speaker of the information? And you usually give some level of historical perspective because, there's such a desire we have in our initial way of communicating anything about news is only right this second matters. Like, don't worry about tomorrow or yesterday. Right now is when you should panic. And what you do is you provide some historical context. Like, is that just kind of the nature of how you inquire into things? Or is this something, a conscious decision you say is like, let's make sure we have a holistic perspective of what it is we're talking about?
Yeah, I think for me, it really comes down to thinking about trying to, again, take the bigger picture as you're looking at a phenomena and really recognizing, especially year over year comparisons right now to 2021 are completely useless. And so it was always fascinating for me that last year at this time, if you remember, everybody's like, well, we can't compare to 2020. We have to go back to 2019. For some reason, everybody forgot that 2021 was equally as wacky of a year as 2020 was, but almost in a reverse way.
Okay.
And so I think part of the reason I think about that too is, I'm a statistician by training. And one of the things that we'll see if we're looking with any of the data going on during COVID is you have to add certain parameters to your models to suck out the complete weirdness that is some of the effects that we observe. Because otherwise you just get results that are nonsensical. And so I think it's because I've had that experience as a statistician saying, okay, how do I get a model to think about picking up the key patterns? You then start thinking, okay, well, since I've had that experience and I know how the underlying mathematics of this are working, I've got to go back and look further. And so that's why for me so much right now is saying, where were we at this time in 17, 18, 19 on something versus today? And that gives you just, I think, a much better picture because at least through today, I've been wrong before, but I think at least through today, I've probably been one of the more bullish folks on the U.S. economy, getting a lot of, negative feedback and criticism from that. But pretty much every data point that's come out has, in general, been consistent with the fact, we're not in a recession. The labor market's still incredibly strong. Consumer spending is still very, very, very robust. And there just doesn't seem to be, this very rapid slowdown coming. I think.
Well, let me push back a little bit. So, I want to sell panic and fear. I'm here to sell discord. So the audience that's watching is going to go, wait, should I not be panicking? And is that, if we say that it's not a recession, we have these things of like some level of decrease in GDP for 2 quarters. Is there any indications that we should be more concerned about things? Or is it really more just like, hey, this is the normal process we go through every couple of years. It's nothing to really be terrified about.
So what I would say is I always draw analogy to what was going on in 2017, 18, and 19 versus today. And when you look at that, all the economic indicators actually would tell you 2019 was a worse period than today, except for the inflation side. And by that, what I mean is industrial production is up year over year right now. It was down in 2019, especially the end of the year, quite dramatically. Houses under construction are up 25% year over year as of right now. In 2019, they went down. That's a huge indicator of a recession. If you start looking at things like, quit rates, they're 20% higher today than what they were in 2019. That's consistent with the tight labor market. And so when you really start taking a look at individual indicators that together provide a better story than GDP, because GDP is just some massive statistic that is aggregated together and really means nothing. It doesn't seem that we're flashing any signs. I think everyone is so concerned somehow that this is like 2008. And it's like, no, we're not in the midst of a financial crisis like we were back then.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, when you look at the financial crisis and the levels of foreclosures and bankruptcies and organizations closing, and even the financial markets itself having to have massive injections of capital just to keep things stable. We don't obviously see that here, but we do have some signs of things like, massing consumer debt. Is these things like you go, that's not something we should be too focused on? Or what do you think about because you posted about it yesterday. I'm kind of curious to get what is the implication we should draw from this increasing level of consumer debt?
Yeah, so I'm going to focus specifically on credit card debt. I'm not going to really worry about mortgages. That's a separate piece. I look at it this way: is it troubling that we've seen very rapid increases in credit card debt? Yes, I mean that's not a great sign, but we're still below 2019 levels. That's somehow been completely missed in this conversation, because people paid down a tremendous amount of credit card debt during the COVID pandemic with the stimulus and not being able to spend on services. So if we take a look at credit card debt relative to, let's say, the average wage, it's much lower today than it was in 2019. If we take a look at credit card debt relative to the number of accounts that are out there, it's down substantially. It's down about 10%, give or take. And that statistic is hard to think about, because on the one hand, somebody could say, well, we're seeing people take out more cards because they've maxed out their existing ones. Okay, could that be happening in some cases? Sure. But could it also be that people, because of stimulus, were able to substantially improve their credit and therefore could actually get a credit card? You can't rule that one out as well.
We see wages increasing too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, no, wages are up substantially. I believe the last reading from the Atlanta Fed's wage tracker, which is a good resource to take a look at, they were up 6.7% year over year,
nice.
which is the highest gain in nominal terms going back to the history of that data, which goes back to 1993. So
now we still have the issue of the inflation. So like inflation, that number of 6.17, I think you said.
Yeah.
How does that compare with inflation, right? Like, so we have the cost of things being more, like diesel fuel, for example. What do we draw from the inflation that we see?
So this is one, in some ways it depends on what's your favorite index. The consumer price index is up a little bit over 9% year over year. The Federal Reserve's preferred measure, the personal consumption expenditure index, is up about 7% year over year. Now this is through June. Everybody's expecting that June is the peak, probably July or year over year is going to come down. The challenge then too is the fact that everybody has their individual inflation rate. And so, for example, if you own a house, and so I'll use us as an example, my family, we refinanced our mortgage. We bought in 2016. We refinanced last spring. We shaved 125 basis points off of our rate, and we locked in 2.75%.
No, that's phenomenal. Yeah, that's a phenomenal rate.
No, it's phenomenal. And so we essentially had a substantial deflation in our housing costs, and that's not going to change. Yeah. So and this is where it becomes challenging to say, how are people going to respond? Because one of the things we have to consider is the biggest part of the consumer price index is shelter costs. And so that's where we start getting into complexities that homeowners with 30-year fixed rate mortgages who refinanced, in 2020, 2021 likely saw deflation in that side.
Hmm.
Whereas people who are renting or getting a mortgage now are seeing the inflation. And so there's so many subtleties here that, when you start taking a look at some macro level statistic, people are going to feel it differently depending on what their spending is and whatnot.
And that was a really good part of our earlier conversation before we went live, was about just your study of macroeconomics, like these trends and forces that happen. They have a kind of rhythm to them, right? Like, it's not like this is an aberration. I mean, COVID was an aberration to an extent, but like, what can you draw from like the look at the macroeconomic perspective? What should we be thinking about the stuff that we read and see today?
Yeah, so what I would say is, let's take consumer spending, because that is so top of mind and it's such a big driver of the economy. One of the things I'll be sharing next week, and I know we shared in anticipation of this, is if you go back and look at the 1970s and 80s, when inflation was worse than today, substantially worse, and you ask yourself, what was the consumer doing when it came to retail sales? And the answer was the steepest drop that we saw, and this is in inflation-adjusted terms year over year, was only 4%, and that was in 1974. And so you start thinking then, is there precedence for, I'm going to throw out a number, a 12% year over year drop in retail sales? No, there isn't. Even adjusted for inflation. The worst of the Great Recession was a 6% year over year drop. So there's no reason to think that, yes, inflation is high. It is the highest it's been in 40 years. There's no doubt of that. But, when we take a look and think of this from a macroeconomic standpoint, we're just in a completely different place than we were in 2008, or even arguably 1974 or 1981, 1982.
So I guess the takeaway for me in this will be, I will withhold judgment on whether I should panic. So I will hold off that for now. Let me ask you this. You're a professor, supply chains. What is a supply chain? What does that term even mean?
I hate that term.
Okay, good. Teach the controversy. All right. What should we use?
So I actually always have liked almost the phrase a supply web. And the reason for that is because things feed back in on themselves all the time. And so when you look at things, there's never this magical linear chain that exists. And I think that's when you start thinking of it as this very dense interconnected web of things feeding into other things, then it starts becoming clear why the disruptions are taking so long to work their way out. And so if you start thinking about things, okay, well, you need, microchips to make everything. So you need microchips to make, milling machines to cut steel, which you need to make fabricated metals to make the machines themselves that make microchips. I mean, so, and all these things just feed in on themselves. And so I usually try to never use the term chain because it's too simple. It has this idea that there's linear links of one manufacturer and one wholesaler.
One distributor, one assembler.
Yeah. And yes, it's done a lot. And I think it's framed that way because it is a simplification. This is me putting on my academic hat, as we would call it. It is a isolation, theoretically, is the proper term that economists would use as we think about things when we say there's one retailer, one supplier, one manufacturer. But I always teach it as it's a dense, interconnected web. And once you realize that, that's when you start to see, okay, this is why the fact the railroads are having problems cascades and affects literally every different piece of this web. Yeah. And so that's who I like to sort of focus on it.
Yeah, as we talk, I'll throw up some of the folks that are commenting in the background. But John Radvansky, calling him out, supply web is a much better description of the environment. I love that. Now, are we going to see you in your future posts use the hashtag supply web? Are you going to take that over? Because I'd love to see that. I mean, we can be the change. We can be the change.
I mean, I could try that, considering the fact I'm also the interim chairperson for a Department of Supply Chain Management. Not sure that necessarily looks the best, saying, my job title's absolutely pointless, but
well, you want to meet your constituents where they are. And I think, like, I use the phrase, because I never heard supply web before. That was never my thinking. I've always used the phrase supply chains as a plural. And I think that they kind of just illustrated that nothing is as simple as as you outlined before. It's not like a this and then this and then this and then there's a product. It's a mass amount of sourcing. I think I read from Steve Greenfield not too long ago that there's like for an auto manufacturer, 20,000 providers that they're pulling stuff from. So the idea of manufacturing anything in a simple process is just crazy. So what is a degree in supply chain management? What does that even mean?
Well, for us here at MSU, what that's going to mean is, focusing, on undergrad, you're going to get good exposure to sourcing or purchasing, operations, and logistics. We do a capstone case-based course. You either do sort of a project-oriented course, or you do a case-based capstone. Then a series of electives, focusing on, project management, transportation management, cost analysis, so more procurement related. And we also have, we call it a sort of a supply chain analytics and models course where we do a little bit more advanced forecasting approaches. So, you learn how to use Excel to set up a solver model to do simple exponential smoothing. You learn the rudiments of linear programming. So if you ever talk to an industrial engineer and they say like an objective function or the knapsack problem, you may have some concept of what it is they're talking about, even though you're unlikely to execute that yourself. And so you get a little bit of exposure into that, but it's really, I'd say, very much focused on sort of those core three areas of purchasing, ops, logistics.
So to be full disclosure, I've been in supply chain now to an extent since probably 2010 when I was a lawyer defending trucking companies. But my undergrad was political science. Political science is not like that. That sounds a lot like math, and that was not the thing that I was going to fall into. What drove you to go into that field of study?
So my dad was, we were talking before. So your dad worked for Roadway.
Yeah, 1976, before deregulation.
Yep. So my dad was a contract owner operator through much of the 80s, from about 82 through 86 out of Northeast Ohio, hauling heavily steel from Cleveland to Baltimore. So for export. So he did that. But the thing was he also was good at doing paperwork. So he pretty much would always end up getting transitioned from, hey, would you want to park that truck and run the terminal for a while?
Okay.
So he did that, got a lot of experience. And then in 1988, he got a job at International or / Navistar.
Yeah. Now owned by Trading Group, right?
Yep. As a sales engineer, mind you, with zero engineering experience, but he had driven enough. He knew, okay, if you needed to do XYZ task with the truck, here's the configuration.
Yeah, there you go. Don't put the diesel next to the DEF. Don't put those in the same spot. That's a bad idea. That's phenomenal.
So that was sort of the exposure then that I had going up was, and again, he was on the road as a sales engineer half the time, but I got more exposure to the industry that way. Never thought I'd do much with it. Went to undergrad. I was a marketing logistics double major. And then I graduated undergrad in 2010, so in the midst of the fallout of the Great Recession. So you couldn't buy a job. A couple of my professors, that was a small school, we worked out together at the same time. We're in the locker room one day, and they're like, Miller, you ever thought of getting a PhD? I'm like, yeah, I've thought about it. I'm like, but I think I should go work and all this and that. And they're like, no, you have no idea what getting PhDs about. Just go now, do it while you're young. You'll appreciate it later. And it turned out that my mentor where I was at in undergrad, one of the students who also had went to my university, John Carroll, Mike Kennymeyer, who was at Ohio State as a tenured faculty member. Mike had went to John Carroll and had the same advisor I did, Paul Murphy.
That's incredible.
And so I didn't realize sort of the background of, how important it was, for these connections. But so Paul was definitely instrumental in me being able to get into Ohio State. And I ended up going straight from undergrad to there.
That's incredible. Well, Jason, I am so sorry. I'm going to have to take a quick break. We have some absolutely breaking news here at the show. So just for a moment, I'm going to have to remove you. And I am joined right now by our special correspondent, Abby Haffenbrettel. Abby.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. You have some breaking news on, I believe, The Bachelorette. Is that right?
I guess I do. Yes. I'm sure everybody's going to be super interested.
Well, let me turn it over to you. I can't wait to see what this is all about.
Okay. Well, breaking news is that Hayden made an apology. Did you know that?
I had heard rumors, but what did he do wrong?
Okay, so for a little background, because I'm sure a lot of you guys don't know what the heck we're talking about, The Bachelorette, there's 2 bachelorettes. They had a group of 35 guys. This is the first year this has ever happened. And at first, the guys were all in one group, and the ladies each had to give combined roses. Then the girls started to pit against each other. The guys started to take sides. There's a whole ordeal. So they decided to split up the girls and the guys. So now if you're either Gabby and Rachel are the names. You're either on team Gabby or you're on team Rachel. And there was one.
Okay, hold on. Kate Matchik is saying here, there was the apology was BS. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, complete BS. So basically what ended up happening, and thank you for watching. I really didn't think anybody would watch this show.
They're all watching. Don't you ever put yourself down, Abby. They are here for lots of information.
Oh my gosh, so funny. Okay, so the girls gave out roses, right? And 3 of the guys rejected Rachel's rose. And then they go back in line, and basically Gabby has the opportunity to give them the rose. But one of the guys, Hayden, he kind of rejected Gabby before that. So Rachel gave him the rose, not really knowing, I guess, what that situation was. And he told Gabby that she was rough around the edges. And then you see clips of him talking in the house. And I think this is so interesting because I love like studying people and seeing how people act when they don't think the cameras are on them, because you can really see their true colors. And so, yeah, he basically told the guys in the house, because they're all in one house together, by the way.
I see that. This is riveting stuff.
Riveting, I know. You guys were having such intelligent conversation. And so here I am giving you a little break.
Well, I have to say thank you, Abby, for joining us today. A couple last questions. Why are there 2 bachelorettes? Why would anyone do 2? That's not the normal process, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, the last season was Clayton. And Clayton was just this big Dumbo. And he accidentally fell in love with 3 girls, but then chose 1. So the other 2 girls basically got screwed because he was a kind of a douche canoe. Right. So they just decided we're going to do 2 bachelorettes, which I'm not sure I agree with, because they kept saying like they're not going to pit the girls against each other. Well, it's very clearly, I mean, they literally label them Team Gabby, Team Rachel. I mean, how else? That's insane.
This is fantastic. The comments are exploding here, Abby, but we have to get back to the program. I want to say thank you so much. Kate says, please send her a message. She'd love to communicate more with you on the story of The Bachelorette. I hope to have you back for future episodes to give us the updates that we so necessarily need for our team and for the audience at hand. Kate says anti-feminist. Okay, these are fighting words, Kate. I will have to table this for now. Abby, thank you so much for joining me. Have a great day. And now back to the regularly scheduled interview. Jason, do you have any questions about The Bachelor? You've been thinking about this at all?
No. So personally, no, but I know one of my co-authors, Alex Scott at the University of Tennessee, he is a diehard fan. So Alex, if you're watching, I'm totally going to call you out on that, because we've had some hysterical text threads over the years about the Bachelor and the Bachelorette. So
I hope that in a future episode we can have your co-author on, and we can have Abby, and we can just listen to them talk about this very interesting and incredible thing. So back to what we were talking about. So you graduated 2010 and you were going to get into a PhD program. So I graduated myself in 2007, and I said to myself, this doesn't need to be adult time yet. Let's take a pause and go to law school. So I went to Michigan State University College of Law from 2007 to 2010. So we were not that far apart in terms of like the age we were graduating. So what pushed you to go into that PhD program? And what was that experience like?
So, I mean, it was one that, part of it was I always could see myself in academia. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Because the thing they really don't explain on the PhD side is, even if it's a PhD in business administration, you're primarily becoming a statistician. nowadays.
Okay.
Like nowadays, if you had to say what are the skills you learned, it's being a statistician and being a computer scientist. Those are the two most
Wow.
important skills by far, because pretty much all the research we do is in some ways going to be done through statistics in one form or another. Great experience. We had a wonderful cohort at Ohio State. My buddy Matt Schwederman, who's at the University of Miami in Ohio, he was at Michigan State for a while, but then moved back closer to home. So he was at OSU, then he came to MSU. So we had a good amount of time overlap here. He was my year, and then Michaela Poliview, who's an assistant professor at Arizona State, and Essen, another individual. She went to Naperville in Illinois. We just had a great young people group. We were really close. Really close with a lot of the folks from there. It's really drinking from a fire hose, because you just get so much thrown at you, and it's very much a journeyman sort of apprenticeship type of thing. And when you graduate, there's a lot of pressure those first 6 years out, because you can be the greatest teacher on the planet, but if you go to a research school like a Michigan State or Ohio State or University of South Carolina, any of these places with good supply chain programs, you can be the best teacher in the world, and if you don't research well, you will be fired at the end of 6 years.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and you get tenure based on being a researcher. Teaching is important to the extent that you don't cause problems, but you don't get tenure on teaching.
So how many courses do you teach, generally speaking, in a given semester?
So in a normal year, I would only teach 9 credit hours in one semester. Okay. So I teach 16 weeks as chairperson. I teach 3 credit hours in a year.
Wow. So your time is mostly spent doing research. Do you have a team of researchers that work with you, or is this all like individual contributor in the brick and down the looking at the microfiche? Maybe probably not microfiche, probably online, but still, like, is it all you, or is there a team with you?
So our doctoral students here really work on their own. We're more mentors to them, but we don't have a system where they work on our projects. So I will work on some projects with the doctoral students where I'm much more in the role of sort of assisting them and helping them out, helping them think about things. So they're learning. And then there's other projects where if it's all folks who have their PhDs and are faculty, we'll be in sometimes different roles depending. So like I just was one paper right now that's under late round review. I'm the 3rd author. So I've contributed a decent amount, but the first 2 authors have done more. There's other projects where I'm lead author, and that means I'm doing most of the work. And so it really, you try to build a portfolio. We always call it a research pipeline, to where you're lead author on some things where you're really doing the work. You're working with other folks on topics that fit your area of expertise where you can provide value, but it's not sucking up all your time. And then with doctoral students, it's much more the advising and mentoring, and usually not getting your hands dirty until, let's say, a paper gets a revision, at which point there's a high likelihood it'll get in. And more than once, that's where it's kind of like, okay, well, you've got other stuff to do. Go study for comps, get out of the way. Yeah. And I've let the veteran do it.
So now I can talk about just academic stuff in general, because I find it fascinating. So as a professor of law, for example, your ability to produce research materials and it published in different journals is a really important factor of not just your academic career as a professor, but also as like your school's ranking and expertise and review overall. And these journals that are out there, at least for law to an extent, maybe 30, 40 people may see it. But what you do, at least I know I am not familiar with your formal research, but your ability to connect with people through social media, you have more people that see your work product than I got to imagine most academics in almost any capacity. I got to think you get thousands of impressions or tens of thousands of impressions. So how does that kind of jive with the academic decision makers? Do they look at that kind of material being produced and go, this is valuable to us? Or do they go, this is just noise, you do it on your own, we care about these published things in these specific journals?
So we've got a very supportive senior leadership team here, and not only the Broad College, but in the university, where there is a recognition that to be thought leaders in any space today, you have to engage in social media.
That's right.
That is a reality. I think the fact that I'm the age I am has sort of helped me in that regard, sort of see that. I go back and forth on this because, none of what I really put on LinkedIn is really my research. I keep that very much, if I'm really researching it, that pretty much stays kind of lock and key, because I don't, one, want to be giving out the ideas to anybody else. But two, because it's focused in such a way that it's not the here and now. It's just not the content that would be interesting of, when the ELD mandate unveiled, how did that affect safety of carriers primarily using contract owner operators versus employees?
Yeah.
But then how was that affect itself contingent on firm size? That is an academic is the beautiful question.
That is a beautiful question.
That's a beautiful academic question that no one cares about.
Oh, I care about it. How can I fund that?
Oh, but we're using data from 2017 and 2018 because that's the distinction when the ELD goes in December of 17. And so that's the academic side. What's going on in the world today and what do you put in the classroom, that's the type of content you put on LinkedIn. So what I view, social media as is I teach 120 students a year. Normally, if I'm teaching undergrad, if I'm teaching MBAs, it's about 60 a year, versus I can go out and post something and get, on average, 12, 13,000 impressions. Some will go higher, some will go lower. But I think it definitely, that's where the media reaches out to you, or that's where, we would never have connected if it wasn't for LinkedIn as an example.
100%. Like what I find so fascinating about like social media generally is like a piece of news will come out. I use the example of like Elon Musk trying to buy Twitter and then trying not to buy Twitter and then getting sued in the Delaware Chancery Court. And then these people will reach out and go, hey, like, what does this mean? Like, can they do this? And I just think like we're watching the textbooks being written right now. And it's so rare to have someone who has some opinion of the topic that might have some level of sophistication go, yeah, this is what specific performance means. It means they're going to force you to buy it. And it's amazing to reach out to people that you never knew would have an appetite for understanding, whether it's a business thing or whether it's a legal thing, like diving into some of the meat and potatoes you don't get to see unless you're actually in the classroom. So I totally admire that. That's how I first came across you, because again, you're one of those prolific faculty at MSU when it comes to the social media. And I think you do a phenomenal job. Now, we were going to have you at a law and supply chain panel at MSU Law. We had Evelyn Smith from Dell. We had Britton Ladd, who's not a lawyer, but a big thought leader in the space. We had Lauren Began, who's a maritime attorney. And then we had Michael Kaiser from, at the time, he was with Rivian. And we couldn't have you because you selfishly decided to have a child. So let's talk about that. How have you looked at, parenthood in the light of being a professor and a social media kind of thought leader? How's that shaped what you do, if it has at all?
Oh, no, it certainly does. And I loved what the now chairman of the board of Home Depot, formerly their CEO, another Spartan, Craig Manier, said one time when he was visiting MSU recently, and a few of us were meeting with him. And he always made he made the statements like, I don't like the phrase work-life balance, because he's like, it's never going to be perfectly in balance. His phrase was work-life integration. And everybody needs to find the extent they want to have work integrated into their overall life. Mm-hmm. What I try to do is, summertime, we spend a lot more time together. I mean, don't think I'm ever, when I'm actually in the office, I'm gone by like 3:30 and I'm like, peace, I'm out, type of thing. I'll work a little bit on the weekends and like Saturday, Sunday morning before the kiddos wake up. But, you put in a 40-hour work week in the summer and you call it good. Semesters when you're teaching a lot, maybe a 50, 55-hour week, but that is what it is. And so you deal with the ebbs and flows. I think being a parent, you learn a degree of patience that's incredible. I've got a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old son.
5 months, right? Six-year-old.
Yeah, 6-year-old and 5 months. He's not sleeping the night yet, so you can see that's right there.
If Matthew Gores watches, he's a chief operating officer for Contract Leasing Corp. His daughter, I think, is like 4 or 5 months. She's like, oh, she sleeps so well. I told him, wait. So you're in the process now of the not sleep. Okay. I love that. Man.
Yeah. Not quite yet that full 8 hours or 7 hours, but you learn incredible patience, but you also then learn an incredible lack of patience with students for not doing things. So it's like, you're old enough. You're 21. You
have
know,
no excuses.
Yeah,
I was tired today.
Yeah. I don't have time to do this. I'm like, oh, do you want to look at what my calendar looks like and then come explain to me that you don't have time? But, my wife and I, it's for us, it's important. Like, we try to go to the gym 4 nights a week, and trying to be as healthy as possible. Do almost all of our own cooking. And so it just takes time. So you have to figure out ways to balance, or not balance, but integrate work and life in the most successful manner that everybody's happy.
Well, I love how you kind of outline this, because I think we're similar. So my father had a company he started in the 90s doing maintenance and repair, but he was gone half the time. Like, he was just not there. He had to be in California, or he had to be in Ohio or Texas. And with my own kids, I wanted to be more present, because when dad got home and he's working 60-hour days, whatever it was, 60-hour weeks, and he'd get in his bedroom or get in the living room, watch TV. That's how he unwound. And I didn't want to have that for my kids. So I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and we have twins on the way. So I want to be present for them and be part of the things they care about. So I don't know if your kids are old enough yet to get into like the Minecraft or the Fortnite, but like, you find these things that they're passionate about, and you want to be present for those things. And you still work at night.
I know every Disney princess there is right now.
There are some great ones now. Like, I love Moana. Phenomenal.
Yeah. I got to put Moana. I mean, it's always funny. It's like, you go old Disney. It's like, okay, Mulan was clearly the best, by far the most mature of all of these. It's like, my daughter will be watching Little Mermaid, and I'm like, oh God, I'm uncomfortable with the message of this movie. This has aged really badly in 33 years since 1989. But yeah, no, it's you try to find the things that they're interested in. In my opinion, my greatest achievement is my daughter and I both love music, and her list of like her favorite songs she loves, or band, she loves Linkin Park. And then I've got her, somehow she's hooked on 80s rock. So I mean, Bon Jovi, Def
I was gonna say Metallica, but that's
and the Scorpions. I mean, it's like, and my buddy Alex and I will be texting each other. It's like, okay, he's got three young kids, and he's like, we're like, parenting achievement of the day. Kids listening to Robert Tepper from Rocky V and liking it. Like, I have succeeded.
I have loved Encanto. Like, I watched that on my own because those songs are so good. They're a Disney Plus, best streaming service out there. Huge fan of what they put together.
Yeah, so I like Encanto, but I'll admit, I actually think Turning Red is more watchable.
Really? I loved Inside Out. Or I think that's.
Oh, I was not a fan of that one.
Really?
I was not a fan of that one. I mean, if I had to pick Encanto, the soundtrack, I will admit, I've caught myself more than once in the office, like, oh, how did that come on? I think I'm just going to leave that go.
We don't talk about Bruno. That's the key. We don't talk about him. Oh, that makes me so happy. Okay, there's some comments here. I'm going to throw them up real quickly, and then we'll start asking some questions and letting people participate. So again, John Radvansky says, quote, work-life balance is balanced different for all. Mine has changed over the years, as I am now at a different phase of my career. As Matt said the other day, take some time to unplug, or your kids will unplug from you. Oh my gosh, if any advice I can give to you, Jason, because I'm older, I think, at this point, with older kids at least. I would get these situations where my kids would want to play with me, and I'd say, just wait, give me a few minutes. I'll get you within a second. And it got to the place where they would just stop asking. And I was like, oh, this is not what I want. I don't want this. All right. Todd Burke, genuinely love your content and research, Jason. Excellent synthesis of academia and real world SC topics. Keep up the great work. So that's another great one. Okay. Now we have some questions here. I don't know who this person is, but I'm going to put it in here. We'll see what it says. It says, Jason clearly is keeping a sophisticated data set on diaper changes, sleep patterns, you name it. The predictive analytics is going to be off the charts, and a parenting book complete with worksheets, pivots, regression analysis will be published for the benefit of all future parents. Only kidding, because I am jealous and I cannot even spell mathematics. Are you keeping data? Like, let me know. You're a scientist now. Are you keeping data on this?
Nah. No. no, with the kiddos, that's one where it's like you enjoy it as much as you can, and like you said, you try to spend as much time as possible. I mean, that's where it's funny, like the little changes I've made over the years. So like before COVID, I'd always do all my final exams in person, so I'd have to grade it. And it sucked. I mean, because we'd have no time to get stuff done, because it's a great idea to force us to give a final exam on Friday and have us have final grades submitted the next Tuesday. Thank you, Michigan State.
Are my grades in yet?
Yeah. Or my favorite, let's let students walk before you put final grades in. Don't even get me started on that one. That's not the best system in place, but I'd be upgrading till 11 o'clock at night, and my daughter would be like, I want to play. And I'm like, I can't do this. Like, I know you want to do something this weekend, but I have to grade these exams, and it's going to take me all weekend. And so that, now I just do it all online. I'm like, here, it just let the computer do it, done, out. I don't have to worry about it. It's more flexible for the students. I have better balance. Heck, there's no evidence of, academic dishonesty or things like that. I mean, if there is, then I've got the worst cheating students ever, given where the averages are. So
is the MBA program on a bell curve? That's what law is. Is there a bell curve for MBA?
It's not like a forced bell curve,
Okay.
at least when I've taught it. I mean, bluntly, even if it was, I sort of just do my own thing with stuff until somebody really yells at me. And I hate to say it, I'm a tenured faculty member, and I'm like, well, you can yell, but I really don't care.
Yeah, where's the for cause letter? None? Oh, okay, great. Have it right there.
Yep, exactly.
That's phenomenal. Okay, so one of the themes I have of this show is talking with people like as they deal with really stressful things. So like what you do as a professor is like, to a certain extent, you have like kind of the future of these students kind of in your hands. Like a C or a D can catastrophically affect somebody. But even more than that, I think the ability to go out and reach into social media and get a massive audience, you'll get people that disagree with you, that say hurtful things, or that are just, not very good people to interact with. How do you deal with stress at scale like that?
Well, so first off, I mean, it's funny because I get that question a lot. And my statement always, and this is to any of my potential academic peers watching this, we all know the reviewer 3 comments, where if people think some of the things that get said on social media are bad, wait till you see how mean academics can be to each other within the same community behind a veil of anonymity. So what I've always learned is, if people disagree with you or they're asking questions, they're at least going to the effort to do that. And a lot of times it's just curiosity, and it's curiosity not expressed nicely. So there's just no reason to get upset about it. I mean,
I love that. The advice I give to people kind of similarly is always attribute a good position they're coming from. They're not trying to be negative, not trying to be bad. Just infer that they're not out there to be difficult. They're just trying to understand something, and their tact hasn't been very good. Just don't assume there's a malintent or bad intent behind all of it.
Well, and I'll give you an example that was actually very telling for me. And this happened years ago. This is before COVID. It would have been about 2018 or 2019, one of those points in time. I think it was 2018. And this is like, I was just getting around to go up for tenure. I was sort of at the height of my research output, where I was producing enough in a 2-year period on average to get tenure, which is a 6 to 8 year process.
Okay.
And I, at that time, really would not take reviewer comments nicely. And I would respond in some cases very aggressively. And we had one paper, it's published now, it's a very good paper. But we had some reviewer comments come in. And when you get to respond to these, when you resubmit your article, and I mean, I'll be blunt, I just destroyed this review. Wrote 20 single space pages taking apart every one of their arguments. And one of the journal editors, who's a good friend of mine, he pulled me aside at the conference and he said, it's like, one, that the thoroughness of the revision was incredible. I don't think I've ever seen somebody send in a 50-page paper, double spaced, and then a 70-page single space response. But 2, I didn't actually send the paper back to the one person. And I'm like, oh, why not? I'm like, I really wanted them to see what I had to. Yeah. And he looked at me and said, look, that was somebody who's young in their career. They're just starting. Goes, you destroyed them. You did. And he's like, you not only, it's like you not only burnt the house down, you stamped, you were stomping on the ashes. It's like, you made a point, you were smarter than them. But that wasn't going to be at all developmental for them. And did you not pause to think maybe they were curious and that they weren't trying to match wits with you? And I thought about that. And I'm like, oh, damn, I really was kind of mean on that. And so I've always tried to, ever since then, sort of step back when people have comments and say, okay, well, why is this person making this? What is the reason they're engaging? I'm going to at least engage as sort of nicely as I can. I mean, there will be points. I mean, you can look through some of my LinkedIn threads where it's like, okay, Jason's clearly getting short right now with this person. But that to me was sort of a very eye-opening lesson of don't get upset with people if they have questions, because they're at least making the effort to ask.
Well, Bob Anno jumps in here. I'm a dear friend of Bob Anno. He ran middle mile for Amazon, did LKQ, bunch of things, and always assumed positive intent. Yep. I think what I learned is I worked at KB Toys as an assistant toy manager, and I did work at Texas Roadhouse, and I learned please be kind to everybody, because it's hard. Yep. It's never a fun time. It's not easy. I have some rapid fire questions. And again, to the audience, please ask questions to Jason. And here's a couple questions I have for you as a business professor. Should Microsoft buy Netflix?
Oh, God, I don't know anything about the tech space.
You could just gut check.
Why the hell not? Sure.
Well, so they've entered a partnership, and what they're doing in this partnership will be to support an ad-based version of Netflix. Now, Netflix had some subscriber loss over the last few quarters, and so this has been people have been floating this around, and so that's why I that's an interesting question. Okay, next one: should Elon Musk buy Twitter? Or will he have to?
Oh, he's going to have to.
Yes.
Yeah. There's no backing out of that. I followed you on that. And I mean, my uncle's a judge, and we've talked about that. And he's like, Elon's screwed, man.
Oh, I've talked to so many people like, oh no, they'll just renegotiate. I'm like, why?
Why would Twitter do that at this point? I mean,
you should take up less money. Sure. No.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, just, if I was them, you just stick him with it and then everybody quit and leave. I mean, if you don't like him as boss,
I've followed this thing since the beginning, just thinking like, what would the game plan be to take the all of the stuff from Tesla, take that as security for your loan to buy Twitter? Just absolutely baffles me. Oh, here's a good question. This is going to be kind of controversial. Abby asks us, our recent expert and correspondent, Common Core math or old school math?
I'm very old school, so I'm gonna sit back with that. I mean, to be blunt, I've been teaching for 10 years now, so I've got to see both sides, and students still suck at math regardless. It's always funny for me, because right now I'm clean shaven with short hair, but usually in the winter I'll get this big bushy beard, long hair, and I'll come in. I mean, I look like a lumberjack, and I'll come in and then start doing matrix algebra on the board, and the students will be like, what? I'm like, yeah, I'm a big white boy, but I can do math. And they're just so completely stunned by this. It's like, no, looks can be deceiving.
That's incredible. I have not learned, and to Abby, as you're still watching us, I don't know the Common Core math. We're beginning to learn that. So my son is 9. Yep. He's going into, I think, 4th grade. So we're starting to understand it. And it's like, I don't like the change either. I don't know if it makes it simpler. I have another question, I think, or at least a comment. It says, Jason is the best. I admire his work and appreciate his mission to provide thoughtful guidance and teachings to a wide audience. Beyond the data, Dr. Miller sharing his approach is incredibly valuable and insightful. Okay, that gives me a question. Do you want to be Professor or Dr. Miller? What's the better?
I don't care. So I mean, for everyone out there who doesn't know how this system works, professor means anyone who teaches at a university, regardless of whether you have a doctorate or not. Or I'm going to say a doctorate level degree. I mean, JD, PhD.
Yeah, I'm a pretend doctor.
Trust me, I almost got engaged to somebody who was one of the MD ones, and I got told a lot. I had another pretend one too. My statement is always is that if you know the person has a doctorate, doctor is always the safe bet, because some faculty, if will get pissed if they hear professor, because professor doesn't for sure denote they have the PhD. So
okay, so now if you this is the thing I learned in the law, and I could be wrong in this, but the naming convention then would be you'd say Dr. Jason Miller. You would not add PhD in that title. You'd say just Dr. Jason Miller, and that part doesn't get part of it. Is that fair?
yeah, that would be fair. Again, I never use my title. I mean, I don't feel the need. I mean, I guess this is an academic bias, but I've always found that people who have an obsessive need to use that, there's a little bit of imposter syndrome going on there.
That's right. I had the same. People use the Esquire after their name. I go, I don't do that. That sounds absurd. I'm not going to do that. Just call me Armchair Attorney or something. Now, I can also imagine, like, if someone says, "Is there a doctor in the house?" and you could say, "Yes, I am," and you say, "Can you help this patient? He's got a problem with their heart." And you'd say, "No, but I have a matrix that I can bring to you and I can help you solve the problem." What has been the most surprising thing you've gotten a chance to study over the last, whatever period of time you want to look at?
You know, I would say in terms of like looking back and saying, you know, what has been the most interesting stuff to study was definitely the ELD mandate. And this is research that Alex Scott and Andy Balthrop really kind of headed up, and I sort of was the trailer on this. But it was just amazing to see the data and just the massive changes in the behavior of your independent owner operators. Then the fact, even through the rest of 2018, still 4% of the time a one power unit carrier got pulled over, they would not get cited for an ELD. And this is in September. It's like, come on, guys. You knew it was a requirement by that point in time.
I find that one of the after effects of the ELD mandate. So for those who are watching who don't know it, so electronic logging devices, large trucking companies had some version of an ELD long before the mandate. Mandate basically says you need to get this thing. And what it boils down to for a small carrier is a monthly subscription that you're going to have to pay for the rest of your career as a truck driver. And what ends up happening is these hundreds, if not thousands of companies pop up solving the ELD mandate because there's this generally revenue stream coming through. And now the telematics providers who became like the ELD people are now fleet management software. It's fascinating to see how that one legal change created this bonanza of new organizations at the cost of American truckers. I have another question. This is a law professor, Professor Dennis Kennedy. Do you think Jason and his department should work with the Michigan State University Center of Law, Technology, and Innovation to develop supply chain courses, events, and other efforts, especially if they include Matthew Leffler? Well, let me answer for you, Jason. Yes. We should.
I trust me. If there's a revenue generating opportunity out there for my unit, it's not going to get me yelled at too badly by the dean's office. I'm all for it right now.
Well, that's a good point you kind of bring up, because when it comes, like, as you talk about the supply web, the legal part is just as close to all of this as everything else. Like we see and we won't have enough time to dive into it, but like AB5 in California, these designations of owner operators and independent contractors or employees create massive challenges for supply webs. So I think there's a path there. We'll have to table that, and we'll have to dig into it at some point.
Yeah, no, I've actually got sitting over in my one filing cabinet over here, a whole pile of legal papers that actually deal with that issue. And, you know, the old, was it the jobbers agreements that used to exist when the U.S. was such a clothing producer between the jobbers and the designers and all of this? Because this issue has been around for well over 100 years.
Yeah, 100%. This is just the way of making someone into a contractor usually is around, how do I minimize my risk? How do I not play benefits? How do I not play workers' compensation? All of these things. Barry Wimberly, who's a truck driver. I love Barry. ELD is one of the best things to happen. And Werner and first, I believe, in decades before it mandated. So Werner was using these ELDs way before. And that's a very good point, Barry. The big trucking companies were actually lobbying with the ATA to put these mandates out. So a lot of times these surprises, like speed limiters we're talking about now in the FMCSA, these are things the big carriers are kind of in favor of, and they kind of force their will on people. Well, we are close to our 1 hour. We have, let's say, 50 seconds to go. Jason, are there any lasting things you'd like to say to our broader audience? We'd love to have you end with whatever you want to say, and I'll make myself disappear. Oh, no, I gotta make you.
No, just everybody. Thanks for tuning in. You know, again, I'll keep generating content. And again, if you have any interest, especially in engaging more with the Department of Supply Chain Management at Michigan State, Like I said, I'm going to be in the interim chairperson position. So please reach out to me. Happy to put you in touch with our outreach specialist and talk more about the different benefits that can come from that. So again, just thank everybody for listening in, and hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you so much, man. I really enjoyed our time together. It was a pleasure to talk with you. And as always, I'm going to kick you off. Stick around. I'll talk to you after the show. And everybody, thank you for tuning in. I encourage you to follow Jason Miller. If you're looking for a voice in the trucking industry, talking about the data and the history and the supply webs we all operate in, Jason could not be a better person to follow. As always, thank you for watching. I appreciate you being a participant in this experiment we have. Hopefully I can bring Jason back for small segments, and absolutely you will see Abby again, I hope. And have a great day. Have a great weekend. See you later, everybody. And then you come back to the stream. I hit end broadcast, and now it's end.